today. Very shortly, I'm going to hand back over to Jackie, and I've got to head off. But thank you very much for having me. I hope you've had a lovely day. The final part of today, I don't need to tell you how important feedback of outcomes to children, young people, and families in real time is to this programme. Nor do I need to outline the many challenges there are demonstrating the outcomes. So I would like to hand over to Miranda Wolpert to take us through the information we have at the centre. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you for sticking around for this slot. I'm very appreciative, and I will try and keep it as short as possible. But if someone can keep doing this to me when they get tired, just... We've got them. Okay, excellent. Great. So I'm going to talk about all the data that you've been collecting and that you've been involved in. Can I just check how many here are frontline practitioners? Vast majority. How many here are data managers, IT people? Probably about 10. How many here are managers, service managers? Probably about an eighth. Who else? Any administrators? Any administrators here? Fine. And policy makers? Yes. I'm looking at you. Fine. Okay. So our task here is to think about the data you've all been fantastically collecting. As we know from the outset of the Child IAPT project, this has been about collecting data for practice on the one hand and for outcomes on the other in terms of evaluation. And I've just been to a really inspirational workshop earlier from Sheffield talking about how they're using outcome data, using iPads in a clinical context. And I think very much people talking in the room about how the absolute priority is for clinical conversations and clinical interactions. If we can get information to help us evaluate the impact of our services, that's also very important. But the primary impetus of having outcome measurement is to actually inform our clinical work or people's clinical work with children, young people and families. So this work really draws on a lot of people that have been involved in this. And one of the things I've been really struck by, I was only able to join since this last workshop. One of the things even there that I've been struck by is someone that's been around rather a long time. A colleague came up to me and said, "Oh, good to see you're still at it." So, I'm just about still at it. But one of the things that I found really inspiring from the workshop I've just been to is that I can see that I'm now past it, that actually it's over to you who are actually still working clinically with young people and families who are finding all sorts of ways to use outcome measurement to inform your work. So I've got nothing to add to that. In a way, you are the generation that are now, you are the pioneers that are using this in useful ways. You will adapt it. You and your clients will find the best ways to use it. And really, our work is to try and help learn from that and feed that back to other people. Particularly want to pay homage, as always, to the unsung heroes and heroines, the people that have to get this into systems, get it up on systems to upload it, all of whom I know are working very closely with you in your sites and who are making sure that the information that you're collecting isn't just sitting in boxes or sitting in systems and not being used, and actually trying to make it so that it's usable by all of us. Particular thanks to the central team at NHS England, who have been so fantastic in also making sure that this information is of the highest quality it can be, chasing people to check whether really what we've got is the right information and making use of it the best possible way, and to the analytic team at Cork, who are involved in actually analysing the data and making sense of it. I've got two parts to this talk. I'm going to be shorter on the first part, not because it's not most important, but because I think you know it all and you're leading the way. And the first part really is going to be about what we are learning about outcome evaluation in terms of clinical practice. That's outcomes for practice. The second part is going to be about what we're learning from the data that you have collected in terms of evaluation, in terms of the impact of your work. So in terms of outcomes for practice, there's a video link up there, but I'm not going to try and show it. On the Court website are free available videos of people using outcome measures. They aren't designed to be best practice. They are people trying it with young people using it in role plays, people trying it different ways of it, sometimes feeling a bit clunky, sometimes feeling a bit awkward. The idea is to encourage people to debate and think how to use the measures. If you've got a tape of yourself using the measures that you'd be happy to upload, the way you've got relevant permissions, we're happy to put it up there. The idea of it be a public space where people can share learning and thinking around this. In terms of what we're learning around outcome measures for practice, what I think has been the traditional experience is the feeling that these measures come in as sort of interruptions into quite a sacred space. And I think we've been rather apologetic over the years about why are we doing this? Is this an intrusion? Is this a piece of paper that's getting in the way of a relationship? This is a poem that came out from an event organised by Young Minds about the feeling that I think Bill facilitated, about the feeling of not wanting to be a number, not wanting just to be reduced in some way to numbers or statistics. And I think that's something that clinicians have been very concerned about, and rightly so. But I guess what I think we're all working towards is the idea that that doesn't have to be what outcome measurement is about, or what using goal setting is about, or what asking people how they're feeling is about. And if done right, then actually there's no need to be apologetic, that this is why wouldn't you ask someone, how are you doing? Why wouldn't you want to track progress? Why wouldn't it be important to young people to be able to check how they're doing and hold you to account for whether things are getting better or not? So in a way, I think we need to move from an apologetic stance to saying the importance of this is too great to treat it as something that's optional. I'm not going to rehearse all the advantages of using patient-reported outcome measures, but I would want to say that we don't want to oversell this. What we know is that there is some tentative evidence that use these measures can reduce premature dropout, can increase effectiveness of relationships, but we don't have strong evidence that, use these measures and people will be cured that would not have otherwise be cured, or use these measures and suddenly everyone will get better. We do feel that it's really crucial that we use measures in the context of a meaningful collaboration, that they're interpreted with the appropriate level of attentiveness, and they're as part of collaborative practice and shared decision making. I guess my own personal belief is that measures, along with good practice, may improve practice, but measures and poor practice are still going to be poor practice. And what we're all collaboratively trying to do is get away from poor practice. And that it's very important they're not seen as the ultimate source of information. We were discussing in the workshop earlier the fact there are going to be all sorts of complexities, and the fact that people are using slightly different versions of the measures, introducing them in slightly different ways. Some are on paper, some are online, all of which will have implications for how we interpret them. So we need to be really mindful of this. They are part of the information. They're not the only information we have about young people and their progress. I think we've already talked before about the fact that the crucial bit from the point of view of the outcomes and evaluation group who've been working on this measurement system is that they need to be used to answer questions that you and young people have that are relevant in terms of what's the problem, what do I want to change, how are we getting on together, how are things going, have we done as much as we can or need to, and how has the experience been generally. If the measurements aren't answering those questions, aren't helping contribute to having answered those questions, then they're not the right measures and we need to find others. Young people on the whole are positive if used appropriately. There are also negative experiences where people say they've been shoved a piece of paper and said, just fill this in, I have no idea why, or fill this in and we're never going to look at it again. But if used part of a conversation about, I'm genuinely interested in how things are going and I want to review, then we have evidence of people finding them as positive assets to therapeutic relationships. We know there are impacts of organisational context. There is evidence from the research literature, and this is a new and emerging literature about the implementation of outcome measures, that where practitioners feel the measures are congruent with their own aims and the organisation's aims, then they feel more positive about their use. And where people are feeling very demoralised and overwhelmed and stressed, funnily enough, they're not so positive about introducing measurement. There's some interesting work from de Jong and others, and she did her PhD on this area, and is an interesting person if you want to read about this, about different personality differences between those who like outcome measures and those who don't like outcome measures. So one of the things she found in her research was that women on the whole tend to be more positive towards getting feedback than men, and that those with higher self-efficacy, and I leave you to interpret that as you will, that those with higher self-efficacy felt more comfortable with negative feedback than those with lower self-efficacy. We know there are major challenges still to uptake of outcome measure. One of the things that I find, one of the most depressing sort of statistics I've found is talking to Mike Lambert, who you will know is sort of the doyen of outcome measurement, who's developing this for adults and young people for many, many years now in the States, and done some of the most rigorous randomized control trials showing that outcome measurement really makes a difference in terms of premature dropout of treatment. He says that as he goes and does these RCTs in different services across the States, when he leaves to finish, and when he's done the RCT, so the people close up their outcome measures and put them away, and they don't actually embed them in their practice. He says even when he's showing them results saying this makes a difference to your clients. Now, I think that's something I feel really proud that I do not think is part of the culture here, that we have tried very hard to say this is not about evaluation or research, this is about our clinical practice. But we know that there are real barriers for all of us in terms of thinking about the burden on people, about the fact that people need the support to do this, about the fact that people are struggling with really complex and difficult IT systems that are not always ideal or fit for purpose. But that with the learning collaborations, with support, there is possibility to use these more effectively. But Duncan and I were mulling on this a bit by email earlier in this week, and saying that in some ways I think we have to be realistic about the fact that sometimes about using the outcome measures despite the IT systems. If you wait for the ideal IT system, you may be waiting some time. One of the things we've also learned from our research on implementation of change more generally in child mental health is there seem to be these three states: apprehension, feeling clunky, and integration into practice. They may be a nice, streamlined, stages, or they may be that one moves in and out of them. But certainly I've come to the belief that there is no way of escaping the feeling clunky stage. So when you first use measurement, as with any other new thing, as when you're learning to drive, you're going to feel a bit awkward. It's quite important to live through that. It still may be that if you do that several times, you still feel it's not useful, that's great. But I think we need to acknowledge that feeling awkward, the feeling clunky, feeling like it isn't quite right, and trying to make attempts to allow yourself time to get used to using these new tools, which are new to most people. These are slides very kindly from Anne that she shared in terms of what she's learning from the monitoring that you're telling her and NHS England generally, that regional outcome monitoring is helping prioritise need, that goals-based outcomes in particular help focus work and encourage reflective practice, and that they can also be used as part of service development conversations. These are quotes from young people, and again I think part of this is also about the clunkiness is not there for the young people. For the young people, if this is just part of practice, this is part of practice. The important thing is its use. It's the fact that these are actually useful tools being used as part of clinical interactions and not pieces of paper or bits of IT that are being done for some other purpose. And we can see a steady increase in numbers of people reporting using outcome measures, and I'm going to go on to data in a minute, but I just want to highlight this one issue. If we compare the number of closed cases, these are young people that have been seen by those of you working in services as part of Child IAPT. If we compare that, what the current figure is 63% of all closed cases have at least 2 meaningful paired outcome data points. That compares with 25% of closed cases in the data set we had before, which was the national Cork data set, using the old snapshot approach where we were doing outcome measurement at time 1 and 6 months later. So it's a massive improvement in data quality. We're still aiming for the 90% target, and some services are already meeting that and exceeding it, but we want all services to be there. I'm going to talk a bit more about that in a minute. One thing I did want to just mention, and I think it links the IT systems, I think we can sometimes get a bit hooked up into thinking that the only place outcome measurement can happen is in the therapeutic space, is in the room. In fact, there's an explosion of measurement and self-reflection and self-management going on out there. How many of you have seen Buddy app? Has anyone used it and found it useful? Yeah. I've only just discovered it, but I would really recommend people look at this. We'll send around these slides, minus some of the data ones that haven't yet been checked, but these slides will go out. This is an app developed by and for young people where they can monitor their own moods. It used the same sort of model of outcome measurement, but the data is owned by the young person. They can choose, they can bring it, they can email it to their doctor, they can email it to their therapist. And I do wonder if this may be one of the ways forward for us in terms of this. The SDQ has already been online in Youth in Mind for many years. About 250,000 young, well, we don't know whether it's young people, 250,000 people make use of it every year. And Mindful has a whole range of measures and things on it. There are a whole range of apps being developed as we speak. This is a growth area. So increasingly young people are going to be used to this as part of the fabric of their lives in terms of self-management, tracking change, looking at change in terms of other trackers they would cover, both physical and mental. So turning then to the findings from data, because I know you really want to end your day with data. The domains, when we set ourselves the task here for Child IAPT, we set ourselves a really ambitious task that we wouldn't just cover sort of, anxiety and depression. We'd cover all the important domains for young people, and we'd use normed measures and idiographic bespoke measures as well. So we have measures about what people want to achieve. We have measures about general well-being. We have measures that allow you to track a range of symptoms, and that's a growing list. Each year we add more to that. We have measures about the experience of the service, and then we have measures about young people's attainment and attendance at school. And the idea is that people can pick and choose from that list. One of the things that we're very aware of is that there is complexity in analysing those measures. And although we very much believe in the use of outcome measurement to help support performance management and evaluation, one of our concerns is to make sure that that is interpreted with the appropriate tentativeness and complexity that deserves. So one approach, which is not necessarily the Child IAPT authorised approach, but is one approach for you to consider, is something we've called the mindful approach, simply because it was a nice mnemonic. Which suggests that if you are working collaboratively with your commissioners, have we got any commissioners here today? 3, great. So if you're working collaboratively with your commissioners, which we would really hope the service providers are doing, our suggestion is that you need to be thinking about outcome measures in terms of different perspectives, which level of interpretation you're going to do, whether it's the team level, the individual client level, not client level, provider level, or the care pathway, and that we suggest that you use funnel plots to enable you to make sure that you're not interpreting things that are just random variation, that you're actually comparing only those services that are outside the confidence intervals, outside the range where you would expect there to be variation by chance. And that what you do is you then look at those cases where you are, compared to other services, doing worse than you would expect. So there'll be a small number where you're doing worse than you would expect, and you would be then discussing that in what we've called directed discussions. So because it's a human tendency, if you're doing worse than someone else, to find all the reasons why the data is wrong, rather than you having something to learn, the suggestion is that you spend some time discussing why the data may be wrong, but a bigger proportion of time saying, well, if these data are correct, what might we do differently? So that at least you start to be thinking about service improvement initiatives that you might want to pursue, but that you do that in the context of a learning collaboration, that commissioners aren't going to come in and say, these data show that you are terrible, because they may not. It is about understanding it in the context. And again, coming from the workshop just come from, these data are uninterpretable at a central level. They are interpretable locally in terms of your local context, in terms of understanding what it means for you locally to have these information. So what I'm going to share with you is the data that you've sent nationally aggregated for last year and this year. bear in mind that the reporting period has changed, so that last year it was done on a calendar year, so it was January to December. This year it's done on a financial year, so it's March to March. So one is for the whole of 2012, the next is for 2013 to 14. So in terms of who was seen, we've got 28,000 children were seen between April and March 2014. I'm not sure that's right. 28,000 children, I think, were seen in total. Is that right, Jenna? No. This is right. Okay, I'm right. 28,000 children were seen in the last annual year. And you can see it's very similar year on year. We've got a vast majority are still open at the end of the year. Small number of cases have been closed. We suspect that's because some systems aren't closing cases when you've actually finished working with them. So one message from here is, please remember to mark your cases closed if they are closed, because our analysis of outcomes will be focusing on closed cases. So you may not look as good as you might be if we do not know that the case is actually being closed. In terms of who was seen, you can see that the age range follows this curve, with the largest group being the 16-year-olds in both years. But in this last year, there seems to be a larger number of under ones, of infants. Now, whether that's an error of data upload or whether it's actually that we're catching those services, which would be great, we don't know yet. In terms of who was seen in terms of gender, you can see that it's proportionally slightly more women than men, which is what you would expect given the teenage preponderance. And in terms of ethnicity, it's very largely white British, but we are seeing increasing numbers now recorded of other ethnic groups, and we're really pleased to see an increase in people's ratings of ethnicity, which is one of the priorities we set ourselves for this year. So that's fantastic if people can please remember to record ethnicity, as it's one of our key performance indicators. In terms of the sort of difficulties you're working with, it probably won't surprise you to know that the most common difficulty is family relationship difficulties. Now, that doesn't mean that that's the difficulty people are necessarily coming with. These are the categories from the current view form which you're filling in, and they're not mutually exclusive, so people may be filling in many of these. But what you are saying is, for a lot of the young people you are seeing, not surprisingly, there are family relationship difficulties. The next most common is low mood, then peer relationship difficulties, then general anxiety, then social anxiety, then separation anxiety, then behavioural difficulties, then self-harm, then care and management problems, then attachment issues, then attention deficit problems, then panic, then PTSD, then OCD, and right down to we've got 53 cases of gender discomfort. In terms of the differences between the years, it looks pretty similar in terms of the sort of general shape, but we have just to note that in 2013 to 14, the data set allowed for additional categories. So some categories were collected this year that weren't collected the year before. One of the things we also look at is, as you know, in the current view form, you can update it when you see people several times, and if new issues emerge that you weren't aware of when you first saw them, or that you weren't, you want to now record, this is the information about what was updated. The red is what was updated, the blue was what was seen as initially at assessment. So the things that are most commonly updated are social anxiety, general anxiety, peer relationship difficulties, low mood, and family relationship difficulties. So our hypothesis is those are sort of things that emerge in subsequent conversations with young people as you go through therapy. In terms of the number of presenting difficulties, you can see that the vast majority, that 16% have only one presenting problem, but a large number have more than one. Now, this slide includes each of the anxiety problems as a separate problem. The next slide, which Jenna has helpfully done, has amalgamated the anxiety and panic items. So even when you amalgamate those, you can see that only 18% of young people being seen only have one specified problem. So the vast majority of people that you're working with are having a multiple array of problems and difficulties. In terms of the type of intervention, you can see that the vast majority of you are doing other. We would really, this is a plea from the heart. Please, can you find it in yourselves to put yourselves into one of the categories? I know it may not feel entirely comfortable, but whichever one feels the least uncomfortable, because interpreting other is very hard to do. We appreciate, I'm just trying to see if we've got eclectic or mixed. Multimodal, yes. So if you can please find it within yourselves to find a category that feels at least slightly constant, it really will help in terms of our thinking around this. In terms of the numbers of sessions attended, and this is for closed cases, you can see again that the modal number is 1. At least it's moved from 2012, which was 0, which we think was a data entry error. But we have now moved to 1. Now we think, and I'll come to this, but you can see again that we've got a lot of young people and families coming once. And I think the mean, if I remember right from my side, is around about 6. Is that right? Yeah. Around about 6 times that people are seeing. But you can see it's skewed with a long tail of some people being seen for a very long number of sessions. In terms of the reason for case closure, the majority of people are ending because there is mutual agreement that it's time to end. Some are ending because of non-attendance, that's 507 in 2013 to 14, but the majority because it's time to end. And that's the case even where they're only seen once. So our hypothesis is that within this group are people that come, get some advice and guidance and feel that's enough. There are people that are being signposted elsewhere and go and get that. There are people that are being referred elsewhere. One of the changes going to be made to the data set from next year will be finer gradations of information about why the case is closed, including those options, being referred elsewhere, having had enough of a consultation. So we should be able to know a bit more about that with that data set. In terms of the referral source, one of the things we had set ourselves as a group was wanting to increase self-referral. It's still pretty low at 2.6%, but one issue you need to be aware of here is that because of the way that's recorded, if people have a single point of entry and there's a self-referral to the single point of entry and then people are recording it from the single point of entry to their team, we may be underestimating self-referral, but it is low, so just be aware of that. And I think it needs to be contextualised in terms of the work that Anne and others are aware of in terms of improving access by self-referral and self-report. I've got 2 minutes I will now finish on. Just to say, as we've said already, it's fantastic that we are moving to 63% of all closed cases have 2 time points of outcome data. I just want to say here, though, that some services are doing even better than that. So we were just looking at one service where we've got cases in for 387 cases where they have 90% with outcome data. I won't name the service this year, but next year they might get an award. And for that service where they have 90% completion rates, they're getting effect sizes pre and post for the measures they're using of ranging from 0.9 to 0.7. which are really high and positive effect sizes for the normed measures, and for the unnormed measures, the goals, it's at 2. So it's fantastic impact. In terms of the outcome data we've got from the aggregate data set, the impact's also looking pretty positive, again ranging from 0.7 to 1.6 for goals. And of those with attendance problems at the start, 51% are improving. Of those with attainment problems at the start, 50% have improved. We've got very, very high positive endorsement from the experience of service questionnaire, although I do need to have a plug here that we've still got low return rates on the experience of service questionnaire. But again, comparing that with data we've got from previous years, from the only other national data set we had, it is a marked improvement, with 83% of children reporting very positive experience, as opposed to 76% 90% of parents as opposed to 83%. And just to say, in that service I mentioned before, interestingly in their ESQ data, 98% of parents were satisfied and 90% of children. And I suppose on that note, I just want to end on a data quality note, which is that I know that Muir Gray and others argue that data quality in itself can be taken as a proxy for quality of service. Now, I'm not sure if that's evidence-based or a belief, but certainly it is something that is out there and certainly something that the surgeons and others are looking into and interested. And I guess I just want to share you, this is live data, anonymized at the moment, but this is data from services who are submitting in the current data window. And you will notice, for example, here we have a service who is submitting 542 cases. They've asked all of them for consent and 2 have refused. This compares with another service where they've taken on 395 cases. They've asked 1 for consent and that 1 refused. So we're quite interested in looking at those differences between services and trying to understand what's going on in those 2 very different experiences. And obviously, one of the things we're doing is moving to, and I'll just wrap up and say there's a rapid audit going on, which is trying to help make sure that those aren't just artifacts of data upload, that we're working with 12 sites, 12 very enthusiastic and exciting sites to make sure that we've got that information, we're combining it with quality information. Anna Hurley is leading this with input from Julian Charles and others. And the results will be out and we'll be able to share it with you, and we look forward to doing so. And I think on that note, I will end. Thank you.
Thank you, Miranda. That certainly was a rapid gallop through, and at the same time as you've given us all permission to feel clunky for a while, I also know that I likewise in the CYP IAPT ERGs give you a really hard time on the other category, don't I? Because it truly seems inconceivable that people don't know what therapy they've given, but you know, I could be wrong. But I think Miranda has emphasised that it's really important to recognise that practice is actually changing in the room, and this was the most important thing we wanted to support, wasn't it? So it's really quite exciting. But as I'm so much of an advocate, as I would be from a sort of physical clinical field, that this is very complex and it's very challenging, but actually the more data we have, the more clout we've got, Kevin's got, I've got, Peter's got, at national level to keep this supported and to keep it going on in the truly transformational way that we have. So please, please, please keep on collecting that data, sending it in, and Miranda can present more next year, which will actually continue to show what a difference this is making to young people.